Namaste, I'm Archana Pami. Welcome back to my channel. This is the how-to series for animal-inspired asanas, and now we are in the Yin Yoga kingdom. So the next pose that we are going to be doing is the Swan pose. Now the basic Swan pose is not much different from what I already showed as the Ekapada Rajakapotasana or the pigeon pose. However, when you're doing it in style, we do not add the back bend. We are only looking at hip rotation. So I will show you three different variations. One is the standard swan pose, which is the full length. But if you find that difficult, you can always approach the seated swan or the sleeping swan pose. So we'll take a look at them, right? So we'll start with the basic swan, and then I will show you the seated swan, and then finally lie down into sleeping swan. Okay, so get onto your fours. This is hip rotation, so if you have any injuries with your hip or your groin or knees, please avoid this asana. So from here we're going to bring the right knee in between the palms and slowly extend the back leg as far out as possible. Now the goal is to be able to sit on both your hips, and if you can't sit, it's absolutely fine. You can just stay here. This is swan pose. We are actually doing an outer hip rotation on the right side of the hip. And you can make this more intense by bringing your palms in front out of you and resting your chest, your belly on top of the right leg and folding forward. Again, you can use a block if required to support the hanging head, and if required you can also use the block below the hip. I will show you when I'm doing the left hand side. So again, to release, you slowly use your palms to walk them back, helping you lift your back, and then use your arm strength to lift the leg off the mat and release. Now I will demonstrate the same on the left hand side before moving into the seated posture. So here again, starting from kneeling, bring your left knee in between the palms, rotate the feet outwards and slowly approach. Place the block on your left hip and then slowly approach, extending the legs behind. Now, like I mentioned, you could stay here till you work. You could stay here till you work to get the hips onto the mat. If not, you can always use a block like I have done and stay here. So you could stay here and use the block and wait, practicing the same pose till your hips sink lower, and then if required add a forward fold by placing the forearms on the mat and just naturally curving your head and letting it relax. Now one thing that I want you to pay attention to is the back foot. You will find an unnecessary stretch on your knee if you're not actively pressing the top of your back foot into the mat. So the moment you press that, you will see that your knee will lightly lift up and there won't be much tension in the knee. Showing in my hand, but the action is there just to demonstrate what happens. So if you just keep like this, if you see even in this joint case, right, you see this, just the elbow is piecing in and the foot is not, the top of the palm is not doing anything. The moment I press that, automatically this gets lifted. So that's the action I want you to do with your feet. And slowly walking back again, inch by inch, and then pushing up and releasing. The next thing that we are going to be doing is the variation of this. If you find this way too intense because you're not just opening up your right side of the hip or the left side of the hip, you're also working the entire leg, because you are working the quad, you are working the hamstrings, everything is pretty much stretching. You can always do the seated version of it where you're just focusing on the hip opening. So again, starting with the right hand side, so just sit with your legs stretched out in front of you. Now what you're going to do is just bend your knees and place the feet on the mat. Place your palms behind you such that the fingers are pointing towards your hips as far out as possible to actually support your back, so that your back is not dropping down and curving like this. You just want it to be straight as much as possible. Now we are going to bring the right foot and place the ankle just a few centimeters below the left knee and scooch back the left foot as far as possible for that deep compression and the hip rotation that is happening on the right hand side of the right hip. So push the right knee away from the chest. The left knee is actually pushing into the chest, and your back is supported with your palms, so you can keep them as close as possible for a deeper stretch or keep them away. But remember, you're going to be in this asana for almost a minute or more, so don't make it too intense. Just find what looks fairly comfortable that you can manage for a minute and then stay there. I'm just doing that for 30 seconds right now just to demonstrate. But when I put them into a sequence, I will show you how you can do it. Now, if you find this intense, to make it slightly easy, you can always place a block. Place your foot on the block and make it easy. If this also feels intense, place your hips on the block. Hey. So find what works best for you, and then you could use that option. Now that we have done the right side, we got to do the left side. So again, sitting with your legs stretched out, then slowly bending the knees. Place the palms behind you such that the fingers are pointing towards your hips. Bring the left foot and place it on top of the right knee, ensuring that your right knee is moving towards your chest and the left knee is moving away from the chest. You don't want this, you want this. And your hips are flat on the mat and your back is lifted and straight. And then you gaze forward and you keep breathing. And release. Just move the right leg down and then you can release the left foot. You can just shake your legs a little bit and then release. So this was one way of doing it. Sometimes when you have back pain, this might feel a little intense. The outer hip rotation actually helps relieve sciatica or the lower back pain that you might have. But sometimes sitting like this might induce a little bit of stretch because you are actually trying to support your back. So the other variation is to do it lying down on our back. I'm just going to demonstrate that. So lie down on your back bend the knees. Now the same action that we are going to do, we are going to bring the right foot over to the left knee. Now you inhale and slowly lift the left knee off the mat. Again, the action is the left knee is moving towards the chest, the right knee is moving away from the chest. You can keep the toes of your feet curled inwards, so that way the muscles are relaxing. Now one thing that I want you to pay attention when you're doing this lying down is, there is a natural tendency, because the right leg is bent, the hip will tend to shift to one side. It could either be towards the right, it could either be towards the left. Your goal is to ensure that both the hips are laying flat. Now you can't just leave it here like this. You slide your right arm in between the gap and the left arm around and wrap the shin of the left leg, and then you pull it closer towards your chest and you hold it. So this gives you even more a deeper compression than what you would get doing seated, and you can stay here for as long as possible. Some of you may find that as you try to wrap around the shin of your left leg, your head may tend to lift, and that may be because your body is still getting used to this deep stretch. Always use a block in that case. Just place the block below your head, and then you will not feel that deep stretch happening in the upper back or your neck arching to be able to reach this. So this is one other modification where you could do this. And even with that, if you have a big belly and you find it difficult to hold, gentle use of yoga strap or a belt. So wrap that around the shin of your leg, just drop it down, hold it with both your left hand and the right hand, and pull it closer towards your chest. So I just use this to demonstrate. I'm comfortable without it. I find it so the left hand leg, the left feet can actually be either toes pointed or toes flexed towards the leg, whatever works for you. I like to keep the right foot toes flexed, so it kind of helps relax the muscles with the hip rotation as well, but the left foot toes pointed, so this feels comfortable for me. Find what works for you. See the difference when you move it. What kind of muscle is relaxing? Are you feeling more pain? Are you feeling more comfort in the stretch? And just choose what works best for you. And slowly releasing from the pose. All you have to do is just release your palms and then place the left foot on the mat and then release the right foot. Now again, like we did with all, repeating this on the left hand side. So bring the left foot and place it right below the right knee, just a few centimeters. Inhale and lift the right foot off the mat. And now slide your fingers through the gaps and hold the right shin, bringing it closer towards your chest. Again, like I showed on the right hand side, you could use a yoga strap to be able to wrap around the shin and pull it closer to the chest. And if you're finding too much of a deep stretch in your back of your neck while trying to get this bind, then you can always keep a cushion or a block under your head. and slowly releasing. As you inhale, drop the feet down and then release the feet. Just going to roll to the right and sit up. So that was the swan pose. Again, I showed you 3 variations. One, the full swan pose, which is pretty equivalent to the pigeon pose that we already did. But this is done without the back bend. It is more focused on just the hip opening and the forward compression. And the second variation is the seated swan. And the third one is sleeping swan. So people who find it difficult to do the full swan pose with the leg extension can start off with the seated version or the sleeping version and then slowly move to the full swan pose. And this is very good for, again, hip mobility, and because of any hip mobility or any hip openers generally work, even for women at least, tone their reproductive organs, and even for men it does the same thing. Makes your sacral chakra, the area where we store emotions, feelings and everything, it unlocks emotions from those places and it gives you those happy vibes. So that's why when you do these hip openers, you generally tend to fold forward. Folding forward gives even more additional benefits, as you are actually, what happens when you're folding forward is nothing that you're just massaging those areas even more. And most of yin yoga poses, as you know, are done for minimum of 1 minute to 2 minutes. So it even gives additional benefits. Please avoid the full swan pose if you have any injuries in your knee, your hip or your ankle, because you're extending the leg, and if you have any injuries, please avoid it. And if you have lower back pain or sciatica or any of these things, the best way to do this is mostly sleeping, and then slowly you can move towards the seated swan. I hope this was useful. Please share your feedback and suggestions. Namaste.